Hey guys, this is Mal Cheer here for this week in e-commerce episode 88. It is Thursday, the 15th of May, recording a little bit later in the week as I'm currently in Singapore at eTail Asia. So it has been a crazy week, and I'm going to keep this one pretty short because I've got to actually go on a panel very, very shortly. So I'm just going to cover off the big headlines for the moment. But like I said at the start of the show, tariffs have now been rolled back in China, where they escalated from 30% to 80% to 145%, and for some retailers, 245%. It has now been wound all the way back down to 30% for goods coming into the US from China and 10% for goods going from the US to China. So what does this mean? Well, it's actually means very little. It means more that, from a retail perspective, that the fears that we will no longer be able to sell into America from Australia, Chinese manufactured goods, is not nearly as bad as what we thought it would be. Now, that's good news for retailers, but at a geopolitical level, there are some more concerns. In the fact that we now know that this is not a serious person. This is a person who, when they put something on the table, their negotiating tactic is to go for a maximalist position, is to ask for as much as they possibly can and take a really extreme position and hope that people will acquiesce, and kind of meet halfway in the middle. In this case, though, 30% is actually a very little concession for China at the moment, where there was previously a 10%, now it's been increased to 30%, which is still relatively small. But it does mean that a lot of businesses who were importing goods from China are now going to be able to continue business without suffering too much of a increased financial burden for that. So this means that a lot of jobs are going to be saved by this. USPS, who'd been laying off a lot of workers, truck drivers, dock workers, all what would be termed Trump people, have been really feeling the impacts of this over the last few weeks as shipments to the US from China have really dried up. There were stories of where there used to be 4 to 6 containers on a ship. Now suddenly there would only be 2 containers. So really drastic drop-offs, meaning that there's fewer jobs available, and a lot of people were being hurt by this, not just China, which I think Trump just intended to. This has meant, though, that he's had to very rapidly backtrack on that without really thinking too much about his position and the impact it would have, meaning that the US is now in a much worse negotiation position by showing the world that they're not a serious player, that when it comes to negotiating on the geopolitical stage, you can really play this sort of game with them and extract what you want, which is essentially what China did. When the US tried to stare down China, the US blinked first. And China have been able to get away with very little concessions, which is obviously good for their business and good for their economy, and has led to a pretty significant rebound in the stock markets as well. If you look over the last couple of weeks, some fairly significant gains have been made across all world markets, especially in the US and especially in the retail sector as well, where Shopify and Klaviyo stock have really recovered a lot of their losses from March and April, and are looking very much heading back up to territory of where they were previously. So good news on that front, but also good news for Australian retailers who are now going to be hit only with a 30% tariff going to the US for the moment. I actually expect that this will probably go down quite a bit in the coming weeks as well as negotiations further. Now, this has just been put in place for 90 days, so we will see what will happen in 90 days' time, whether they can come to a better agreement. But for the moment, we're looking at 30% tariffs for Australian goods going into the US, which were manufactured in China. So look out for that one. Also, I should add as well that a couple of weeks ago, I talked about that loophole with the national carrier network allowing goods coming from Australia, even if they were manufactured in China, to be marked country of origin Australia. They've actually closed that. That was seen as a bit of a loophole, but it has now been closed. There's been official word from the global body that is not the case, and it is definitely country of origin China for goods being shipped from Australia if it's manufactured in China. Now, another story which crept up yesterday from Carla Penn-Khan is that SurfStitch look like they're no longer in business. SurfStitch, one of the OGs in the e-commerce space, they've been around for I think about 20 or so years now. Very, very early days, and at one point very huge. Before the Iconic, they were the Iconic before the Iconic, and really helping to grow and build a lot of brands here in Australia. It appears that they've now shut their doors with their site no longer active, and a lot of customers complaining as well about not receiving their goods, nor actually getting any word from the company itself about what the status of their orders are. Now, this is no real surprise for anyone who's been watching SurfStitch and their parent company for the last few years. They have been hemorrhaging money like no one's business. They've undergone a number of restructures in that time as well, but have never really been able to recover their footing. Interesting note that when you look at some of the comments about SurfStitch, customers are saying they're going to be missed because they miss the discounts. They miss the constant discounting which SurfStitch used to do to be able to maintain relevance in the market, which really goes to show that you can't win or maintain market share by doing that because it's just hurting your bottom line. It appears that when SurfStitch really focus on that strategy as being their main go-to-market approach, it was a race to the bottom for them. And that's clearly the case here where they've been unable to maintain market share. They've been losing that gradually over the last several years and ultimately no longer in a position to be able to operate as so it appears. Now, we don't actually know the details yet because SurfStitch haven't actually announced or made any releases at all about this. So we're going to have to wait for what the official word is. But another company we have actually heard official word from in the last couple of weeks is ZeroCo. Now, you remember about 4 to 6 weeks ago, I talked about how there was a high likelihood that it appeared that ZeroCo were going to be closing their doors. And that was definitely the case with on the 1st of May, they've decided to actually close their doors and no longer operate. And this was put down to reasons which I talked about before, with their new innovation with their products going to a fully recyclable package for their products. There were a lot of issues with that and unable to really find a path to profitability and deciding that rather than go through the pain, they were going to exit gracefully from that. Now, I do commend ZeroCo for that because it means that money can actually go back to the shareholders, that rather than try to burn through cash to be able to find a solution and no guarantees of finding that solution, actually pivoting and realizing that, you know what, the best outcome for shareholders is to give them some return back on their dollar. Now, obviously, it's not a positive return and not a good outcome for people who are expecting to make some out of it. But for ZeroCo and Mike in particular, this is, I feel, a really good move for them. It actually feels that, they've done the responsible thing here by looking at all their options and realizing that there was no path to profitability. And the best thing to do was to step out of the market. They've had a great team and really did do a lot of good in the world, I feel, through their ocean cleanups. And look, I'm definitely proud to have been a part of this story, even a small little part of it. So I'm really proud of the impact they've had. I wish they obviously could have done more with that. But the fact is that they gave it a go. They gave it a really red hot go and trying to do some super innovative things, all with that focus of saving the planet in mind, which is something which I really hope that more businesses can actually start to do and adopt. And we as consumers can actually start to recognize the good which those brands are doing and help to support them more. Now, another story which I caught up on this week was that it appears that a lot of the e-commerce lenders, so these are the revenue-based financing ones, such as Amazon, Shopify, Wayflyer, it appears that they've actually made their criteria much stricter for who they're going to invest in. A lot of reports coming out of the US are showing that Shopify are no longer offering capital as freely as they once were, with a lot of retailers saying that where they would previously have seen the Shopify capital available to them, that's now been removed from their site. But also when talking with Shopify as well, some people actually saying that they're finding it harder to actually access loans from Shopify. And this just shows the uncertainty currently in the market, that as the market really starts to cool and people actually start being more concerned around profitability, unit economics, and a sustainable path to growth, lenders are starting to rethink what their strategy is, in particular around who they're lending to. So what are the impacts here is that I expect that this is something which is going to has flowed through to Australia as well. I know that Wayflyer's owners are really considering more about who they're providing capital to. And that's a good thing, because I think with easy capital means that a lot of people do make some really dumb mistakes and are potentially accessing capital when they shouldn't have, which does put a real strain on your business, particularly if you don't have good margins, particularly if you don't have good unit economics. That revenue-based financing means that you can sometimes have 10, 20% of your total sales being taken out every day to service that loan, which means you then have less to pay for all your other expenses. And unless you can do that really smartly, it can really put you in a deep hole, as Paul and I have talked about quite often. Now, there is definitely a place for revenue-based financing, but you do need to make sure that you do have good, solid unit economics and really good, solid fundamentals in place. So what I do ask for everyone is that if you are thinking of going down this path, is that you consider all options for financing. And if revenue-based financing makes sense, make sure you have a really good path towards being able to repay that loan as well. But also know that it's not as easy to get anymore either. So even if you do want to access it, lenders may not be as willing to lend it to you if you don't have those good fundamentals in place. And like I mentioned earlier, I am currently at eTail Asia, and it has been an absolute blast. This is my second time here at eTail Asia, my first time chairing, and I chaired the day one yesterday, which was a lot of fun. So from making the opening remarks to then watching all the sensational sessions, there is so much to learn from this market. As Australians, we will typically try to move first when we go cross-border into the US and UK, which makes a ton of sense and is absolutely the right thing to do. But there is a market here in Asia, particularly in Singapore, for Australian brands to enter into for two reasons. One is that there is a lot of expats here. There's a lot of expats from Australia here. Matter of fact, at the conference, there's at least a dozen people. When I heard the Australian accents going on, at least a dozen people here from Australia. So there's already an affinity for the country and the brand, but also what Brand Australia means, that Brand Australia still does reflect a lifestyle, a way of living, and is a very aspirational place to be if you live in Southeast Asia. So these are things which Australian brands can absolutely be tapping into and thinking about if you are looking to expand, how do you get into this market? But a couple of learnings which I've got over the last few days is just the importance of omni-channel here. That whereas in Australia, you can really survive just by being a D2C brand, the majority of brands here are omni-channel. And the reason why is that not everyone is so easy to shop online. And one of the big tensions here in Southeast Asia is between having your own website, your D2C brand.com, and marketplaces. Where marketplaces originally were the primary mode to sell online for a lot of brands here and have been the case through the likes of Lazada and Shopee, who own such a huge share of the online shopping market here. That is now gradually starting to change, with people starting to realize that when you sell only on a marketplace, you are very restricted with what you do. So in particular, from a premium and luxury brand perspective, you're forced to do things you wouldn't normally do. You're forced to participate in price promotions. You're forced to promote and market your product in certain ways, which means that you can't build your own brand equity with that. So the opportunity here is that a lot of the brands here now are starting to think more about how do they go D2C? How do they build out their own brand.com, own their brand, but also own the customer lifecycle and the customer experience as well? Because fundamentally, if someone experiences your brand and buys from them on a marketplace, they're not your customer. They are the marketplace's customer. So that desire now is to own that whole customer experience and sell more to them D2C, whether that be online or offline. And the nature of the market here is that people move around quite a lot. There is a lot of movement, throughout cities, across different countries as well. People move around very, very easily. So having that visibility in high traffic areas, which are typically malls because of the heat, is a huge opportunity to be able to build that brand equity, that brand familiarity, and that brand affinity, so that when they are ready to buy your product, they will go and buy your product. So a big opportunity there for Australian brands to come in particular Australian fashion. There appears to be a real love and desire for Australian fashion brands here. And that's something where I'm speaking to a few retailers here. They are actively looking to bring in Australian brands to this market. So anyone who's thinking about wholesaling into other markets, have a look at Singapore, have a look at the Southeast Asian market. I think you might be pleasantly surprised. But in the meantime, this is an area which is really growing very quickly and fast, becoming quite sophisticated in terms of their marketing, in terms of their operations as they move more towards D2C. And there's also a hell of a lot of people here and a hell of a lot of retailers here doing some extremely cool things. One brand who I spoke to called Wasted, they recycle and repurpose waste materials into new materials to then make homewares and furnishings out of and sell them D2C, but also bespoke and wholesale sales as well. So really, really cool. Another brand, Ice Secret, is a founder-led brand who have facial serums, which are doing some really, really great things over here as well and growing very quickly. But similar to Australian brands, very founder-led, very influencer-led. And again, those similarities around people wanting to identify with a person really resonate in this market as well. The importance of using the right influencers, or in Asia, what I refer to as KOLs, so key opinion leaders, is just as high as it is here, as it is in Australia. But also that understanding as well that those influencers can be transient, that you do need to build equity in your own distinctive brand assets, of which people and founders are a huge part of that. So you can see through a lot of areas, a lot of similarities in terms of what the go-to-market is here for brands in Asia, as it is for Australia, and a huge opportunity there as well. But the big tip, as I've always said, and what has been echoed here, is that you can't go to it with a top-down approach. You can't just expect to run ads here and sell. People need to see you on the ground. And that is the big learning for cross-border. With so many people now preaching cross-border, it's not a magic bullet to just say, we're going to turn on another market, start running ads, and the sales will flood in. That is patently not true. You absolutely do need to do the groundwork and build the foundations from the ground up of building interest, awareness, desire. Actually, I got that wrong. It's awareness, interest, and desire in your brand before people will act. And that needs to come through multiple channels. That just can't come through your ads. You need to be looking at your influencer strategy. You need to be looking at events and activations. You need to be looking at partnerships and collaborations to do that. And there's some great brands here who are looking for those opportunities to partner with new and exciting brands to break into this market. So I highly recommend that you have a look here if you are thinking about that expansion into Asia. But I just want to call out a couple of other brands as well, namely Maison de Sabre. I spoke about Maison de Sabre in my keynote and also on a couple of panels as well. And the feedback has been amazing. I was actually surprised by how many people had heard of Maison de Sabre. Now, working closely with the brand, we don't advertise into Southeast Asia, but organically people have heard about the brand and have bought into the story and want to find out more about it, especially here in Singapore. So that was something really exciting to know, that brands here, but also consumers here, are looking really closely at really cool Australian brands doing great, innovative things. So on that note, I've got to go ahead into my panel, keep innovating, keep growing, and keep selling. And I'll see you back next week.